So guys, you've all heard in the news in the last 24 hours that reports come out that about Telford, the grooming gangs, and probably the worst case in Britain. This is not actually frigging right, because every city across the UK, this kind of thing is happening on an industrial scale. These are not just sexual grooming gangs, these are rape gangs, raping young people, young as 10, 11-year-olds, and destroying their lives. Telford is not the only town or the city where it's happening. You just have to Google any town: Bradford, Leeds, Aylesbury, Oxford, Bristol, Newcastle, and you're getting the same formula, that lover boy formula, providing people with gifts, providing them with drink and drugs, and then drugging them and then raping them on an industrial scale. Girls young as 11, 10-year-olds. Makes me sick to the core when I hear these things. But girls young as 10, 11, passed on to people, town to town, raped by 5 to 10 people a day. And you know what? The rape gangs went out and done it. But the government, the council, the police aided and abetted them. By remaining silent on this issue, they were actually on the side of the perpetrators. And still to this date, nobody really wants to tackle the core of the problem. Everybody's too scared. Everybody's too PC, politically correct. Everybody wants to appease. In the last 40 years, it's appeasement. And appeasement in my books is cowardice. We have people in high positions who could make changes overnight that would have an impact across the UK, but there are too much of cowards. These people will say the right words because it's in the press now, and they'll be saying them for the next 2-3 days, and once it's out the press, once the news is gone, out of sight, out of mind, and they haven't done anything about it. Things that were put in place after the Rotherham ain't working. It ain't working because we're not tackling the real cause. We can't even say, without being accused of racism or Islamophobia, we can't even say who these perpetrators are. But if we can't say who they are, how can we tackle these visible people? You know, these invisible people. We've got to make them visible so we can tackle this problem. It's sickening, and I would love to swear, because there are words here that I would love to use, but which I won't. I won't belittle myself, but it hurts me. It hurts me for reasons. For the last 20 years, we've been saying these things to police forces up and down the country, and all they've been saying is bring proof, bring proof, bring proof. And we now know they've been sitting on proofs. Rotherham was sitting on proof. Telford was sitting on proof. And it's extremely sickening in the case of Telford, when these perpetrators, these gangs, these rape gangs, were given 20-year sentences, and one of them's already out after 5, and he's probably, you know, sitting in the sun somewhere outside, having no remorse of what he's done.
An investigation into one of the worst cases of child sex abuse in the UK is stalling due to a lack of qualified personnel. The abuse scandal centres around the sexual exploitation of over 1,400 children over the course of 3 decades in the British town of Rotherham. It was revealed that 80% of the suspected perpetrators were of Pakistani origin. RT's Polly Boyko now looking at why the investigation, launched 3 years ago, is failing to make progress.
According to the senior officer investigating the scandal, 100 more police officers are needed to uncover the truth. So far, police have managed to interview 17% of a possible 1,500 victims due to a shortage in specially trained detectives.
It's a really specialist area, engaging and interviewing vulnerable victims. A lot of our victims were children when they were abused, but they're now adults and have associated problems as a result of that abuse, including suicidal tendencies, mental health issues, drug and alcohol addiction.
The Rotherham scandal led to a national outcry when the scale of the child abuse was first exposed back in 2012. 2 years later, an independent inquiry found that for decades, through systemic failures in policing and social services, the sexual abuse of children went on right under the noses of the authorities. Gangs of men, the majority of whom were of Pakistani origin, preyed on mostly white girls aged from 11 to 15. Many of the victims thought they were in relationships with their abusers. When the crimes were uncovered, local authorities in Yorkshire were accused of failing to tackle the problem, partly through fear of being branded racist.
On the part of the authorities, in their cases, they were actually saying that these girls made a lifestyle choice. It's about the fact that the authorities didn't want to be branded racist. The ringleaders of the Rotherham grooming gang last year, I think, they're distant relatives of mine. But you know what? It doesn't change the responsibility that people like me have on tackling this particular issue. So I've been campaigning against child sexual exploitation and on-street gang grooming gangs who are predominantly of a Pakistani origin for over 10 years.
The investigation into Rotherham abuse has cost £10 million so far. 4 individuals have been convicted, 18 have been charged, and 38 have been arrested. No one senior has been held to account. And with just 17% of the victims interviewed so far, all this may just be the tip of the iceberg.
Coming up, an explosive report you just have to see to believe. Muslims rape gangs targeting girls by the thousands, but the truth is being silenced by political correctness. It's a huge scandal in Britain. Muslim rape gangs. You may not have heard much about it. It's been covered up by the media and the government. But now we're about to show you the entire story, and it is shocking. Dale Hurd brings us this incredible story from London.
Some scandals are so massive that they're simply hard to believe. But this one is true. As many as 1 million white English children may have been the victims of Muslim rape gangs, better known as grooming gangs, in towns up and down Great Britain. Policy analyst George Igler.
I mean, when you counter an issue that is just so unbelievable, just so outside your frame of reference and understanding, the immediate human reaction is just not want to believe it at all.
Perhaps even harder to believe is that while there have been prosecutions, British authorities have still not stopped this criminal activity. There's a particular problem involving Pakistani heritage men who target young, vulnerable white English girls. Not my words, but a member of Parliament, Jack Straw, who also said these Pakistani heritage men view white English girls as, quote, easy meat. This is when some shout racism, but here are the facts. Calculations based on convictions show that a British Muslim male is 170 times more likely to be part of a sex grooming gang than a non-Muslim. And there are no recorded instances of non-Muslims doing this to Muslim girls as part of a criminal enterprise. In one local jurisdiction, it was estimated that 6 out of 7 Muslim males either knew about or were part of a grooming gang.
What you do not have is any example of non-Muslim men targeting Muslim girls for this organized form of abuse. So the argument that this crime exists everywhere is not only false, but is being deliberately cultivated by the media and by the government inquiry that is kicking the can down the road.
The grooming gangs have been traced back as far as the late 1980s. At-risk white English girls, often from broken homes and some as young as 9 years old, were wooed or groomed by teenage Muslim boys called Romeos, and even by groups of Muslim men who hung around school gates. The plan was to make the girl feel important. She was given gifts and drugs, but she was being groomed to be a drug-addicted prostitute. Then came the gang rapes. The girls were threatened with death if they tried to flee.
It's not just sexual abuse. It is unspeakable levels of violence. Victims being raped with knives, victims being raped with bottles, victims having their tongue nailed to tables. These are sometimes girls who are being picked up from children's homes on a Friday, are being raped during the course of the weekend by hundreds of men, and then returned with bleeding groins back to the children's homes on a Monday morning, and they don't do anything about it at all.
Christine's goddaughter was preyed on by the grooming gangs and is helping girls through the group Women Against Grooming.
They pulled up by the side of her in cars. They tried to get her in the car. They were talking to her. Come on, come with us. We'll take you here. We'll take you there.
Were you saying that the authorities make it sound like it's the English girl's fault?
Yeah, or the parents' fault. It's your fault because you haven't got control of your child.
If you are a young English girl, particularly between the ages of 9 and 14, and you find yourself subject to the perversions of Muslim men, you effectively exist in a country where the forces of law and order don't exist at all.
Stephen Lennon, also known as Tommy Robinson, former leader of the English Defence League, was just a young boy in the town of Luton when he learned a family member had been victimized by a grooming gang.
My cousin was raped and she was found naked running from the Muslim community, aged 13. The police wouldn't help. All the police would say is she's a drug addict. She was a drug addict because they got her hooked on drugs after grooming and raping her.
Some say grooming gangs originate from a particular region of Pakistan, but others point out that the Quran encourages Muslims to take enemy women as sex slaves, and that Muhammad had sex with a 9-year-old wife. ISIS defends sexual slavery as Islamic, saying enslaving the families of the infidels and taking their women as concubines is a firmly established aspect of the Sharia, or Islamic law. The reason these crimes were covered up and continue to this day is political correctness. No one wanted to be called a racist. The definitive book on this scandal is Easy Meat by Peter McLaughlin, who declined an on-camera interview for safety reasons. He told us journalists would not speak about it because the perpetrators were mostly dark-skinned and Muslim. Childcare professionals used political correctness as an omerta, a code of silence concerning what the public was allowed to know.
These girls are the victims of a multicultural revolution, and it's certainly an indication of the fact that this accusation of racism is potentially the most powerful political weapon known to man. This is also an example of what can happen in a country of 60 million where the press just refuse to report, where the cries of all these agencies fail to merely discuss what's going on, and it's only going to get worse for this reason.
The cover-up was eventually exposed, yet the grooming gangs continue to operate. One victim told a British newspaper, "Nothing has changed, not in the slightest. It's still the same scale as before."
They get sexual kicks out of ruining the most precious possession that those people have, their daughters.
Stephen Lennon warned that there will be repercussions.
But there will be a lot of blood spilled in this country, and it'll be on the hands of our leaders. And there'll come a time when they'll realise what they've done. And the country's people will realise what they've done as well. They've sold us out, they've destroyed our nation, they've destroyed our culture.
All right, Paul, so let's just take another comment from the man in the middle here.
Going back to your integration policy, where I think you've mentioned that where the perpetrators of sex grooming gangs are continually targeting girls from outside their community, why do you think the UK political parties are so shy of noticing this pattern where the victims are almost always white girls, Sikh girls and Hindu girls, and the grooming gangs are almost always from a particular section of the community, i.e. Pakistani Muslims?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it's because of political correctness. Other political parties Other political parties and local authorities have turned a blind eye for this for far too long. And we end up in a situation like Rotherham, where we've had 1,400 girls who've been either groomed or raped or gone through terrible, terrible things. The fact is, because of political correctness, we've said nothing and we've turned a blind eye. The point is, I would argue that religion and race in these circumstances should be an aggravating factor when these cases go to court.
Right. So you actually want, because these people have been through the criminal justice system and they were convicted in the cases that you've said. What do you want to do further? You want to make their religion?
Well, in future, well, actually, religion and race in other cases are an aggravating factor, but again, when it comes to these grooming gangs, it hasn't been, and it is wrong. These girls are being picked generally because they're Hindu, they're Sikh, but predominantly they're white and they're Christian. These girls aren't being groomed from within the Muslim community.
My Lords, I fear that reply is shamefully inadequate, because these girls are usually raped several times a day. And so if we accept the views of our lead police officer for child protection, of Rotherham's MP, and of the recent Jay and Quilliam reports, we seem to be looking at millions of rapes of white and Sikh girls by Muslim men, only 222 of whom have been convicted since 2005. So, my Lords, will the government ask our Muslim leaders whether the perpetrators can claim that their behaviour is sanctioned in the Quran, and to issue a fatwa against it? And second, my Lords, will the government encourage a national debate about the various interpretations of Islam? Can we talk about Islam without being accused of hate crime?